Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our 10th episode of Finding Her Voice, a podcast about women who make film by the women who love film. I am Allison Johnson, and once again, I am joined by TYF editor in chief Gabby Bondi. Our fellow movie and television critic AJ Caulfield is not able to join us this month, unfortunately, but she has left some comments about the films. I think she was pretty much on the same page as us in terms of how much she enjoyed them. This month, we tackled romance in films, primarily romantic comedies. We've spent a lot of time over the last 10 months talking about the unfair skewering movies in this genre get, and we're hoping that this month's picks were able to shine a light on the diverse stories these films can tell. We watched Gina Prince-bythewood's Beyond the Lights, Alice Wu's Saving Face, and Gillian Robespierre's Obvious Child. For our starter question, we're doing it somewhat differently, but I wanted to ask, what element do you think is crucial in building an effective romance on film?
Well, I was actually thinking about this quite a bit today, and I couldn't decide. But I think I've landed on chemistry. I think I've landed on chemistry, and I don't know if I was overthinking it, but I don't know. I just feel like I think it's that kind of feeling that two people give off each other that makes you sort of believe in a romance, even if the film itself isn't that great or the writing's not that great. But if you kind of feel a chemistry between the two, the between the romantic pairing, then I think you're somewhat going to be engaged and a little bit more invested, and I think that kind of goes a lot further than maybe other elements.
No, I agree, and that was definitely the one that I thought of first, but I assumed somebody was going to think about it, so I
Yeah.
wanted, and I've found that what I've loved, or like the movies that I really love and the pairings that I really love, are the ones who have lives outside of their romances. It's something that was kind of an overarching theme in the films we picked this month, was that these people had lives, and these women specifically had lives outside of the relationships they were in. And I think, it sounds ridiculous to say this like it's a novel concept, but I think women being three-dimensional and having different aspects for them, I think it adds to that chemistry because you believe that they're real people. So that was kind of what I landed on, but it's pretty vague, and it seems so simple, but clearly we need better defined female characters in film, and when it's done well in romance, it just makes it all the better and all the more believable. And oftentimes these films are kind of based on fantasy settings. Not the
Right.
ones we picked, granted, but in most cases, we're supposed to believe that people fall in love in a day. And if we buy the characters and their stories, we're going to buy that more. Um, but yeah, no, but I mean, it really does come down to chemistry because I've loved a lot of shitty films based on how like intense I buy the chemistry of the two leads.
Oh, so yeah, same
uh,
here. I've gone like on some recent rom-com binges, and yeah, I'm
oh
like,
yeah,
there's such
me too.
bad, there's such bad movies, but it's just like you still get the feelings from it, so you're like, ah, okay, I like it. But I think one thing that's interesting about the element you're picking out is that um and I don't necessarily agree with this, but like I guess maybe sometimes they don't want to make the women three-dimensional because they want them to be like someone that you could easily like slip into and be that
Sure.
person. And if they're too specific, you might not find them relatable or even likable, and that would ruin it. But I totally disagree with that line of thinking, but I'm pretty sure like a lot of like Hollywood producers think that way. But
No, for sure. I can definitely see it as like they want they want people to be able to insert themselves into it, and so they're drawing kind of a hollow character so you can project yourself onto their personality traits. Like I definitely see that, and I think you're right. I definitely don't agree with it, like you said. Like I don't agree with the practice of it.
yeah.
Um, you have examples of films that people adore with these fully fledged characters. But yeah. Another day in Sex is Hollywood, which could just be the name of this podcast at this point. So switching gears back to the films in general, do you have general thoughts on the films? Did you have a favorite? I know you'd seen two before.
Yes, I've seen
Okay.
I saw Beyond the Lights when it was in theaters, and I saw Obvious Child like a few months after it came out. And I really loved both of them. I think Obvious Child ended up being like in my top 10 of that year it came out. Um and yeah, and I loved Beyond the Lights too. I was really surprised by that one because I guess from the trailers and the advertisements it didn't look like it was going to be as good as it was, but it really surprised me and it moved me a lot. Um, so the new to me movie was Saving Face, and it actually ended up, I think, being my favorite of the three. Well, maybe not. I don't know. I'm kind of like tied between Obvious Child and Saving Face. So I have to like rewatch Obvious Child to like see if my love for it is still as strong since it's been a while. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I think I watched that one like 3 times in a few months when it first came out. But yeah, I really love all three, and I recently actually like made my personal top 100 films, and all three are in it. So I was really excited to revisit some of these this month, and
Mhm.
Saving Face actually is definitely my favorite of the three. I rewatched it a ton. I think it's so watchable and charming. Um, and I just think it's a typical romantic comedy and narrative with a completely different subject matter that we don't see. You know, a woman, it's a diverse relationship. It's a lesbian relationship, and
Mhm.
we don't see that in Hollywood. But it was played in the same way that we would see, a straight heteronormative couple on film, straight white couple on film is what I meant there.
Mhm.
But yeah, I love all of them, and I love all of them for such different reasons, which is why I think I've been so drawn to them. Which kind of leads me to my next point, which is these are three very different films showcasing female directors and how they introduce romance and themes in the genre that often go unexplored in films. Um, directed directed by more mainstream talent and where the relationships reflect that mainstream talent, meaning straight, white, and male dominated. So I just don't know if you wanted to have your thoughts on that about how they're all so wildly different, but yet they kind of appeal to that romantic comedy aspect.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of just relates to to your point earlier about how these are not three-dimensional I mean, these are three-dimensional characters. They're not flat. And I think when you flesh out a character, it's automatically going to make for a different experience because everyone's different. Everyone has a different life and a different background and what makes them them and what they bring to a relationship, and watching that play out on screen is going to be totally different from one person to another. So I think that's ultimately what makes them different is that the female characters actually have these lives built for them, and you're watching them go on this journey, based off what their stories are before they meet their romantic opposite. um but yeah, I also just kind of like that these three films kind of feature women of color in different kinds of relationships. And I guess in a lot of ways I really loved you know Beyond the Lights because it shows like this girl who's dealing with fame and this glamorous life, and it's kind of like something that's really interesting. um and then you have Saving Face, which is like this really like heavily cultural film, and this girl who's so immersed in it, but she also does her own thing, and she's living, she's a New Yorker and she's a doctor, and so it's kind of interesting in that way. And then I think there's a lot of themes in Obvious Child that you don't see in other romantic films at all. And I think the romance in that is really surprisingly tender and adorable. And yeah, and that's kind of like my rundown.
No, I get it. I mean, you kind of covered all of it, though, like
Yeah.
that is, but it's just showing women in completely different parts of their life. And I think, it just goes back to the idea of why we need female talent and why we need diverse talent telling these stories, because we're going to get different aspects of life shown on screen. And when we do that, we are building bridges to that diversity and that human complexity. Um, and I just think that's crucial in film. Yeah. um, so a crucial part about Saving Face and Obvious Child is the relationships the leads have outside of their significant romantic others. So clearly, I was thinking about this a lot when I talked about it earlier. And so I don't know if you wanted to talk about, how like the relationships in Saving Face and Obvious Child between the mother and daughters, which I thought were just as significant almost as the romance or Obvious Child in the friendships, and how, Jenny Slate's friend in Obvious Child is so out to bat for her that you just wish you had a friend like her in real life. Like, and I'm hoping most of us do, like I just think it's a really special thing. And it was those relationships that made me like care so deeply about all of the characters.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing when you're watching kind of like the typical rom-coms, you're wondering about like their family, like what does their family think of this? Like, I mean, I guess if you I mean, I personally have grown up like my family being super involved in everything I do. Um, and it's not necessarily that I've always wanted them to be that involved, but at the same time, I don't mind it so much because this is how I was raised, and that's just how my life is, and how I guess our little familial culture is. And so it's just kind of interesting, like especially with Saving Face, like this girl's very tightly, like the main character is very tight with her family. I mean, her mother moves in with her automatically once she's ousted by her own father for being pregnant with some man's baby, and um, and it just kind of goes to show how difficult sometimes it is to be open with your family, knowing that they are older and they have different views, but at the same rate, you have that. I mean, you care about them enough, and they're part of your life, and so when you see that on screen, it's kind of nice to know that it's just like it's not everyone's just not living their life like singularly. Like there's other people like who factor into the decisions you make, and it's not just romantic partners; it's friends and it's family.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because, my family is similar in that, they just always seem to be here and there and like in a good way. And it's how I've grown up too. Maybe just, we've always been a little unit. But there was a moment that like it was so simple, but it's so true to life where Jenny Slate's walking around in her mom's Crocs. And like, it's just like something so simple that nobody would think of as being like an important moment in any movie, but I've done things like that, and
Yeah.
it's just so specific that like I think adding those little touches that kind of breathe life into these relationships and make us like it makes sense that that's how they would act, or like how the two friends would trade clothes or go and do random errands together. I just think it adds such a layer of realism to the film, and it just it's just a number of the reasons why I love them so much. But I definitely think the familial aspects of these films are crucial, even to an extent beyond the lights. But the relationship is obviously just much more tense between the mother and daughter, but it still adds to who Noni is as a person.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I definitely think yeah, those little simple details like go a long way into like making you believe in the story and thinking it's real and relating to it. Like even in Saving Face, I noticed that there was a scene where she's talking with I'm so bad at names of characters, but she's in the clothing store talking to the girl she's dating. I forgot her name. I'm so
Vivian,
sorry.
I think.
Vivian, yes. And they're like talking and they're looking through clothes, but they're not really looking at clothes, but they're touching all the clothes. And like my
Yeah.
mom, like my friends or my mom, like we always do that. Like you're shopping and you're touching everything, but you're not
I
looking at
know.
it.
You're just like thumbing through. It's like a book.
It's like that. And I just thought that's like a simple detail, like a simple like kind of habit that, I think maybe male directors wouldn't pick up on, but a female director would like instantly like, okay, that's totally normal. So
Exactly.
yeah.
And it's, like I won't go as far to say that men shouldn't direct female pictures. Like that is
Right.
not my point, but there's certainly a subtlety and a layer of just this empathetic understanding of women and their habits that women directors are going to get more. So it's either, study a little bit more about the subjects that you're writing about, or let more female directors do it, because then we're going to get these subtle nods that make us all kind of feel like we're like, it's like we can watch something and we can be like, oh, they obviously know our experience. And that's nice and refreshing.
Yeah.
I'm trying to just think, because the next topic that we kind of had down, it's a little more serious in this. I'm trying to think of it some natural, but let's just go to it anyway.
Yeah.
Obvious Child, Beyond the Lights, and Saving Face. Obviously, two of the three are a little bit more comedic in nature, but there's still, Obvious Child's dealing with the subject of abortion, and Beyond the Lights and Saving Face are talking about race and sexuality, and all three handle it so naturally that it never feels like those are the parts of the films that we're supposed to like focus in on. You know what I mean? Like it's not like
It's not like you think like Obvious Child is an abortion movie. Like that's not the first thing you
exactly.
think of. Yeah.
Exactly. It's so much more than that. It just so happens that the character gets an abortion and she thinks very little about the actual subject matter at hand. It's more about, well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to tell the person who I slept with and, so forth. And Saving Face, it's like her sexuality beyond the relationship with her mother
Mm-hmm.
is almost secondary. It's more about her as a character and how she demonstrates affection. And
Mm-hmm.
similarly with Beyond the Lights, it's it makes such powerful statements in my eyes, I would assume, to about race, just when like Noni steps out with her natural hair, and it doesn't make a big fuss out of it, but it's a big moment in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I think again, it's just I'm being redundant, but it's just we can strip layer upon layer back on these films and see how important they are because they're tackling these serious issues under a genre that many might find frivolous. And I think that's interesting. So yeah, thoughts?
Yeah,
I
no,
really left you I really gave you a clear entryway there.
yeah, totally. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think they kind of, have these multiple layers to them that again make them feel very filling and like fulfilling when you're watching them. I really like how I guess also I mean race is handled in Beyond the Lights and also like kind of her depression, her unhappiness is also kind of given a highlight because I mean there's a moment where she's a little suicidal and
Yeah.
ready to jump off the ledge because she's so unhappy and no one's listening to her. And I think as far as race goes, you see it just at the state of the industry she's in, the music industry, which is, so vapid at times, especially pop music to a degree. I mean, there's obviously artists who kind of go beyond that, Beyonce, but still like but still it's still like, very shallow industry. So I think it kind of shines a light on how women are treated, especially, compared to men. Because I think like that rapper she's like dating, quote unquote, like he's
Yeah.
just I
This
mean, you see it in
asshole.
those scenes. Yeah, it's and with Saving Face, I mean, Saving Face tackles a lot. Like it does
Right?
obviously like her homosexuality, also kind of ageism. I don't want to spoil the movie for anyone, but you see a
Yeah.
unorthodox relationship, I guess, age wise. And it's all done like within this kind of very conservative community of, Chinese people who are kind of freaked out by the whole thing, and it's all scandalous, but I guess that's what makes the movie like so entertaining, though, is just kind of watching everyone's reactions to it, and these characters like overcoming it, like realizing that this narrow-mindedness shouldn't stop you from being happy and going for what you want. But yeah, and I guess with like Obvious Child, yeah, I've never really thought of it as an abortion movie, but
No, not at all.
I've seen kind of some people kind of like allude to it that way, but I think they're missing the point because
Have you watched it at all with anybody outside of our age group? Because
no.
my parents watched it per my recommendation, and they
Uh-oh.
weren't as thrilled with the ending. But, they're more conservative than I am. So there's that, but I don't know also if maybe there is an age thing coming in play with, I think Obvious Child really just struck a chord also with the millennial culture,
Right, it
just
did.
how they interact with each other. So I didn't know if your parents maybe saw it or like, you know what I mean? I'm just curious. I just want to kind of poll people.
Yeah, I would never recommend it to my parents because I know they wouldn't like it, and not necessarily because of the abortion, but because of the humor in it. They don't really like
Yeah.
super crude humor, so they'll be like,
Yeah.
they would not think Jenny Slate's funny in this at all. So they
See, I really took a gamble.
and I mean, my parents they're not really conservative, but
Yeah.
they're more like I don't know how to say this. I mean, they're I don't want to speak for them, but I mean, I believe they're pro-choice, but more like they would personally never get an abortion kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
just like, but either way, I mean, I don't really know a lot of older people in
Well,
outside
I
of
know
my
my parents.
I know my parents. And
But even they're not that old.
but like one of my friends, she watched it and she really loved it, and but she's like my age, and maybe I should ask my brother to watch it and see what he thinks.
Maybe. I mean, my boyfriend absolutely adored this movie and like had a crush on Jenny Slate leaving it. So I have to imagine it is kind of a generational thing. Um, but yeah, no, I'm just curious. I'm curious if people, beyond critics, like let's make that one clear. Like people not
Yeah,
who don't love film already, if people have
the
seen it,
normals. That's what I
yeah.
call them. Normals.
The people who go outside. I'm just kidding. We go outside sometimes, I'm sure. Not to speak for you, but I do eventually to get to the car and back. But yeah, so I'm just curious, because I think it is kind of polarizing in that the humor is very crude in a sense, but it's only really crude because it's talking about things with women that don't normally get talked about. And I won't go into detail here just because I don't know how to talk about it without like also being kind of crude. But like there are just jokes in Obvious Child that like I was dying at because I've never seen it talked about anywhere. But yeah, there's just a really good gag. But like there's really a good one. If anybody hasn't seen this movie who likes Jenny Slate or comedies or romantic comedies or movies, like see this fucking movie. But and there's our explicit rating for the week. But let's move forward because AJ, I've just skimmed over her question, has like a really insightful question that she wanted us to talk about. And like she's so scholarly sometimes with these, but she said an underlying theme I noticed throughout all three films was the concept of truth of some sort. Whether that's a personal truth a character has to grapple with against the proposed truths of the world around them, like an Obvious Child where Slate's character is told how to behave, the choices she should make, which go against her internal voice, or an actual reality someone has to come to terms with, as in Beyond the Lights, where Noni steps up to the plate, quote unquote, despite all of her circumstances to become the artist she believes she was meant to be. In the clear example in Saving Face of the people in Will's mother's life shunning her for her pregnancy and Will's own doubts about showing Vivian affection in public. Do you think these films could be seen as romantic for the female leads themselves? that the self-discovery or reaching these truths to experience could be elements of romance of their own.
Yeah.
Oh, whoa. AJ's so smart.
Yeah.
We're missing her thoughts this month. It would have been a fun one. Oh my gosh, I don't even know how to tackle this. Um,
I think
but
there's a
yeah,
romance in self-discovery. I think it's like, I mean, initially it's essentially self-love. I mean, kind of coming to grips with who you are and accepting who you are and not letting that stop you from going after what you want. And that I think is like ultimately romantic. I mean,
yeah,
there's no doubt about that.
and we talked briefly last month when we were talking about like Under the Tuscan Sun and things to come about how films can feel romantic without romances in them. And
Mhm.
I think all three of these films fit the bill as well because of like AJ said and like you just said, there is something kind of like self-conquering about loving yourself, and it's something that not a lot of people find the way to do early in life. It usually takes a couple of decades under your belt before you get like comfortable in yourself where you can be like, yeah, I think I'm awesome and I have self-worth and whatever. And I think all these characters grappling with that and coming to a place where they can find that ability to do so is romantic in its own way. And I think the characters would find their story a romance because they're coming to that conclusion. Um, and like they're getting their happy endings not so much based on the romance but on how they achieved that romance, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, um I think a lot of women, especially women our age, we're trying to find that perfect balance between having this romantic life, this companion, but then also like your own personal goals and achievements and wanting to fulfill those. And we want both of them now. It's not just before where, I mean, it was kind of pushed that women should only want a husband or whatever and children and blah. And
Yuck.
no offense, people with children, sorry. But yeah, like, I mean, I definitely think that, I guess maybe that's what ultimately why we personally love these movies, just because we see that in these women, and we understand that right away because we're all like that. We're all ambitious and we all have our goals and we all are on our own personal paths of self-discovery, especially, at this age that we are. I definitely think, I mean, I'm still discovering who I am and I still have
Oh,
setbacks and
hell
all that.
yes.
And I mean, yeah, it doesn't happen right when you think it is. Not when you're a little kid and you think you see someone who's 25 and they're like, "Oh my God, they have it all down." And I'm like, "Oh God, I don't at all."
Yeah, I thought high schoolers on the OC had it all down when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I also thought I would look like all the characters on the OC when I was a kid. And then I turned 18 and I was like, well, that was a fucking lie. Sidebar. But yeah, no, I think it's a really good point that you made. And I think, like you said, the age group that we're in, it's a really important message to receive. And it is a reason why I love these films is that, I kind of see pieces of myself in all these characters, despite the fact that their lives are so polar opposite from mine. Um, and all are on this trajectory of life that I'm not even like remarkably close to. Like it's so different. And I think that's interesting that we can watch something and, I can relate to a diverse gay doctor living in New York. Like, I think that's interesting. And I think that should be something that happens more often in film. And again, it just comes down to the point of view presenting it. But yeah, did you have any questions or anything that you'd wanted to talk about specifically?
No, not really. I mean, I think we covered kind of a lot of the themes that I picked up on, and yeah, I mean, yeah, I
Would
think
you recommend Saving Face to anybody? Do you think that's one that you can kind of recommend to everyone because it has all these themes of family and romance?
yeah, I definitely think yeah, I think that would be something my parents would like, and yeah, my friends probably would too. I think Yeah, I think especially people who come from like very cultural families who are like
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that adds a whole other element to experiencing the film.
Oh yeah, it does. I think you kind of relate to it in a way, just that tight-knit community of people who like feel like everything in your life is their business.
Everything is known. um, that's so funny. Yeah, no, that's just, I guess that is a whole other element. I lent that also out to a friend. Two of these three movies we talked about, I own all three on DVD, and I lent two of them out. I'm never gonna get them back. Okay, so I guess that's it. So thank you all for listening. In March, we're going to be talking briefly. I'm sure most of us will be seeing it before I fall, because it's going to be the big release in March, directed by women. And I think going forward, that would be interesting to talk about the big releases. Like briefly again, because I think doing it in the manner that we have has been pretty cool. But we're going to take a bit of a divergence this month, and we're going to talk about films edited by women. So we're going to specifically focus or specifically watch Faults, which was edited by Sarah Beth Shapiro, and Mad Max Fury Road by Margaret Sixo. Did I say Shapiro wrong again?
No, you said it right.
Okay, I said it wrong before we started this because I'm an idiot. So Gabby had to correct me. Yeah, I kind of am. Speaking wise, I'm a lot smarter when I write. There's a lot more ums and like me just swearing when I'm talking. But yeah, so we're going to talk about those two films specifically, but also talk about directors like Joss Whedon and Mike Nichols, not Mike Nichols, Jeff Nichols,
Jeff Nichols, yeah.
and Martin Scorsese. Oops, different directors there, and Martin Scorsese, who have all had long-lasting relationships with female editors, and kind of talk about why that's interesting and why, they're so valued as an editor, but we don't see, as somebody who's kind of making the last cut of a film and who can greatly influence how it turns out, and yet we're not seeing them so much in the director chair. So I think it should be an interesting discussion, and one that we certainly haven't tackled so far. So it was a great idea, Gabby. I should probably give you the credit here.
Thank you.
But thank you all again for joining us for our 10th episode, which means we've been doing this for 10 months. It's just crazy. And make sure to join us next month. We're on Twitter now at Finding Her Voice. You can find both of us at TYF Official and on the Young Folks Facebook page. You can find me at Allison AJ. And Gabby?
I'm at Gabrielle Adele.
Okay, and make sure to listen to our other podcasts, especially Define, which Gabby runs and I guest on. And we're on iTunes, Shout Engine. Check us out, rate, review, say nice things, and we can't wait to talk to you next month. Have a good one.